Hey guys, Redneck Mini 14 here. Today I want to talk about another topic that I've seen on YouTube recently, and it's the fact that people are saying that the 40 Smith and Wesson is a dead round, or it's a dying round, or it's obsolete. And I want to explain why I don't think that that's really the case. So, I see a lot of people nowadays, they talk about how 9mm is kind of the go-to round, and it's like everybody makes a gun in 9mm, and it seems like very few other caliber options in most cases, not all cases, but it's like the 40 cal, which used to be the big, powerful round that everybody wanted back in the early 2000s, and I guess even in the 90s. It's kind of going by the wayside. But is it a dead round? Is it obsolete, like a lot of people are saying? I personally don't think so, and here's why. Number one, how many millions and millions of guns are out there on the used market that take 40 cal? How many police trade-ins and how many guns that people have sold because they need money or whatever. For whatever reason, they sold their old 40 Smith and Wessons, or they traded them for something else. And how many millions of guns are there? I mean, I feel like almost everybody under the sun made a 40 Smith and Wesson or several over the years, and here's just a couple examples here. But there's a lot. This right here is a Ruger P91 DC. This is a 40 cal, and this is just an example of one model that's out there on the market. You got the old Smith and Wesson 4000 series. You got all the Glocks that are still on the market, by the way. There's just all kinds of 40 Smith and Wesson, used 40 Smith and Wesson guns out there, and there are still a bunch of new production 40 Smith and Wesson guns out there. I know that companies like Ruger and SIG and maybe a few others have dropped the 40 Smith and Wesson from their lineup, but one big player is Glock. Glock still makes several 40 Smith and Wessons. They make a 40 Smith and Wesson in just about every size that they offer. But not only Glock, but you still have Smith and Wesson, you still have Taurus, you still have Springfield Armory. I'm sure you still have companies like Carr and High Point that they make single stack 40s, and I'm sure there are others as well. So there are still a lot of 40 Smith and Wessons still out there on the market. Now, I've seen a lot of people say that because 10mm exists, that 40 Smith & Wesson is basically obsolete because 10mm is the only round you need, right? And I'm not saying that 10mm is a bad round, but let's look at why somebody would want a 40 Smith & Wesson or why somebody would want a 10mm. Now, I have three rounds here. Obviously, I've got the 9mm Luger on the left, got the 40 in the middle, and I got the 45 on the right. So, in my opinion, the whole reason you would want a gun chambered in 40 Smith & Wesson is you want a gun that's a 9mm size gun, because the 40 Smith & Wesson compared to the 9mm, they're about the same length, the same height, whatever you want to call that. And so therefore you have the same grip frame, but it's a more powerful round, and 40 Smith & Wesson is undoubtedly more powerful than a standard 9mm or a standard 45 ACP. Now, you can get plus P rounds in both the 9 and the 45, and you can probably get plus Ps in the 40 as well. But when we're talking about standard rounds, standard powered rounds, a 40 is typically more powerful than a 9 or a 45. And you're not really sacrificing that much ammo capacity in your pistol when compared to a 9mm when you're going up to a 40. But you are if you're going all the way up to a 45. So, for example, back in the day, before the whole assault weapons ban of 94 happened, this is a Ruger P89, and so this is a 15 round capacity pistol. So that's a pretty standard capacity for 9mm pistols back then, and it's a fairly standard capacity nowadays. I mean, a lot of guns, 9mm pistols, they take 17, 18 rounds, but even today, there's still a lot of 9mm pistols that are 15, 16 rounds. So that's kind of about average compared to the P91. Now this one isn't the best comparison, but the P91 had an 11 round magazine. And today I would assume that you could probably change up a spring or change up a follower and make it like a 12 round capacity. I honestly feel like you could get 12 rounds in that gun easily if you made a few modifications to it, or if Ruger had made a few modifications to it. But another option back in the day was the 40, the 4006 or the 40. I don't even know what all the different Smith and Wessons were, but by comparison, the Smith and Wesson 5906, 5904, 5903, those were also 15 round capacity pistols, just like the Ruger P89. And I think the 40 Smith and Wesson options that were comparable to those guns, I think they might have been able to take 12. So you're sacrificing 3 rounds in order to have a much more powerful round. Now, comparing that to a Glock, which is still on the market today. So we have a Glock P80 right here, which is basically a Glock 17, just a special edition Glock 17. This is a 17 round capacity. This is kind of the standard in today's world, the Glock 17 or even the Glock 19, but the Glock's 17 is a 17 round capacity. So that's kind of your standard when it comes to Glock. In comparison to the Glock 22, which is just the Glock 17 and 40 cal, this is a 15 round capacity. So 15 rounds of 40 Smith and Wesson compared to 17 rounds of 9mm. So you get a pretty good, more powerful round in the 40 Smith and Wesson. You got a bigger bullet. You have, faster velocity, generally speaking. This is just, only sacrificing 2, maybe 3 rounds. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer there. And, a lot of people will say, well, the recoil is so much more in the 40. I've shot 9mm and I've shot 40s for quite a few years now, and honestly, in the same size guns, I don't really see much of a difference in recoil at all. Now, I'm, a more seasoned shooter than a lot of newcomers, but, I mean, even when I was a fairly new shooter and I was shooting my brother-in-law's Smith & Wesson M&P 40 and his 1911 and his, he had a 9mm as well, I didn't think that 40 cal had much recoil at all. In fact, the 9mm that he had was a Smith & Wesson like 908 or something, which is basically like a Smith & Wesson 3913. So it's a compact or subcompact 9mm. That 9mm had a lot more recoil than that Smith & Wesson M&P 40. Granted, it's 2 different size guns, but still, I didn't feel like the 40 when I was shooting it back then, and I was very new to handgun shooting. I didn't think it had very much recoil at all. So, I don't know, take that for whatever you will. But by comparison, going back to what I was originally talking about, is it true that because 10mm exists, that the 40 cal is now obsolete? Well, there are a lot of 10mm on the market today, but I feel like a lot of them are single stack, whereas a lot of 40 cals on the market back then and today, they're double stack. So 10 millimeter. In case you didn't know, 10 millimeters actually where 40 Smith and Wesson comes from. It's basically a 40 Smith and Wesson that is about the same length as a 45 ACP. So the 45 ACP total length is just a little bit longer than the 40 Smith and Wesson or the 9 millimeter, and the 10 millimeter came first. And it was, it's basically designed to go in like a 1911 size pistol, but it's a 40 caliber or 10 millimeter. So, and 10 millimeter, it is more powerful than 40 Smith and Wesson, and it's more powerful than 45 ACP. But a lot of your 10 millimeter pistols are going to be single stack, like I said. So you have all your 1911s, you got your like SIG P220s. There's a couple of them out there that are chambered in 10 millimeter, but they're single stack 10 millimeters. And like the old Smith and Wessons, those were single stack. And I think there might even be a few others that are single stack. Now there are some double stack. An obvious example being a Glock 20, so that's a Glock 22. But the Glock 20 is a little bit scaled up version of the Glock 22, or the Glock 21 is the 45 ACP version. The 20 and the 21, they're the same size, but the 20 is a 10 millimeter and it takes 15 round magazines, double stack, versus your Glock 21, which I think is 13 rounds double stack. And so that's the only one off the top of my head that comes in a double stack configuration. Of course, I know there are some others, but I'm just not as familiar with them. But I'm sure there's, 1, 2, maybe 3 other 10 millimeters out there on the market or on the market in the past that, that take double stack magazines and have more capacity. But for the most part, I feel like the majority of the time when I see a gun that's in 10 millimeter, it's a 1911 or it's a Glock, or it's something else on the used market. But so sure, 10 millimeter is a much more powerful round than 40, but the majority of the 40 cals that are out there, I feel like have more capacity, or sometimes the same capacity as the 10 millimeter, and the 10 millimeter is going to have more recoil. Now, does it have that much more recoil than a 40 cal? I don't know, because I haven't shot that many 10 millimeters in my life, and I haven't shot the same size 10 millimeter and 40, or at least a similar size 10 millimeter and 40 side by side to know. But whenever I shot a 10 millimeter, I didn't think that it was super uncontrollable. Now, of course, I was only shooting like probably your standard range loads. So, if you're talking like Buffalo Bore 10 millimeter, or your big, heavy, 200, 220 grain Underwood, hard cast lead ammo, I'm sure that's a lot more powerful. But typically speaking, I don't know that a 10 millimeter is going to have that much more recoil than the 40, but people of smaller stature, women, younger people with less experience with guns, they might think a 10 millimeter is a little too uncontrollable for them. So, for all these reasons that I've just given, I don't think that the 40 Smith and Wesson is dead or obsolete or on life support, as some people have said. Now, sure, it's not as common or as popular as 9 millimeter, and honestly, 9 millimeter has always, in my opinion, been more popular. It's just kind of, 40 was kind of a fad, but it was a really big, really popular fad. And because of that, because there were so many guns out there chambered in 40, and not the military, but law enforcement, a lot of police officers, law enforcement agencies used 40 Smith and Wesson. And because of all these reasons, I don't think 40 is going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, it's more popular, and I would definitely say even today, it is still more popular and more common than the 10 millimeter. Although the 10 millimeter has been picking up steam, but I mean, it's definitely more common than other rounds like 357 SIG or 30 Super Carry, which is a new one on the block. And, you know, the 30 Super Carry, that's it's already kind of a dying and failed round, but there's other calibers out there. 45 gap. I mean, I only know of Glock that's made 45 gap pistols, and they still do. I think somebody said that Springfield Armory made them at one point in time, but I've never seen them myself, so I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, you know, there are just other rounds out there that 40 is definitely more popular than, including 10 millimeter. But 10 millimeter, again, is still a very popular, very common round. So anyway, those are my reasons and my opinions on why I don't think that 40 cal is a dead round. And I honestly don't think that 40 cal is going anywhere. Now, a lot of manufacturers may drop the round, but there's still, like I said, millions and millions of used guns out there on the market today, and in the future, because, I mean, typically guns don't just blow up for no reason unless you're doing something stupid. So, I mean, all those guns that are still on the market today, they'll probably be on the market and in people's homes for decades to come. So I don't think the 40 is going anywhere. I think ammo manufacturers are going to continue making it. It may be a little more scarce than it once was, but that still doesn't mean that it's a dead or a dying round. So anyway, that's all I got to say about that.
Hey, before I go, I just thought I'd remind everybody that I do have a second channel called Redneck Off the Range. Over there, I post most of my non-gun related content, so whether it's a video on my new tractor, my power tools, my projects that I'm working on, maybe wild game recipes, or just a random vlog, I post all of this kind of content over on my secondary channel. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go check it out, Redneck Off the Range. But that's all for this video, so subscribe to my channel, like me on Facebook. I'm Redneck Mini 14, and until next time, be safe.